I was standing in front of a rusted vending machine outside the Greyhound station, staring at the dollar bill in my hand like it could somehow multiply if I wished hard enough. That dollar was all I had left. Rent was overdue. I hadn't eaten in a day and a half, and the job interview I'd taken a loan to travel for? Cancelled without notice. Then I saw him. He sat on the cold concrete, knees tucked into his chest, wearing a torn flannel that had long given up on warmth. His beard was wild, peppered with ash and grime. But it was his eyes that made me freeze. They were alert, clear, and focused, scanning every passerby with a calm that didn't match the hunger on his face. He didn't beg. He just sat there, with a cardboard sign beside him. It didn't say homeless or hungry or veteran. It just said, "If you stop for a second, I'll change your life." I almost walked past. But something about him, maybe the way his gaze met mine without a hint of shame, pulled me in. I crouched down, ignoring the stale stench of the street. "You hungry?" I asked, holding out the dollar. He didn't smile, didn't flinch, just looked at me and said softly, "Are you sure?" That question cut deeper than it should have. No one had asked me that all week. Not my landlord. Not the woman who ghosted me after I asked to borrow bus fare. No one cared if I was sure about anything. "I'm sure," I said. I handed him the last thing I had. He accepted it with both hands like it was gold. Not like a pity handout, like something sacred. Then he did something unexpected. He stood up, and with the kind of dignity I hadn't seen in months, he said, "Come back here tomorrow. At 8 a.m. I'll be right here. I owe you." I gave him a tired chuckle. "You don't owe me anything, man." His face stayed serious. "No. You'll see." And with that, he turned and walked around the corner, disappearing into the night like a ghost with unfinished business. I didn't know it then, but that moment, that single dollar was about to flip my entire life upside down. I didn't sleep that night. My stomach growled in waves, curling me into myself like I could somehow shrink the hunger out. The motel I was crashing at was more of a roof than a room, mold on the walls, flickering light overhead, and a heater that coughed more than it worked. But it was what I could afford 3 nights ago when I still had hope. Now I was just existing. Lying there, I kept replaying the man's words in my head. "Come back here tomorrow. I owe you." He'd spoken with the conviction of someone who knew something I didn't. Like he held a secret that didn't match the dirt under his nails or the blisters on his hands. I mean, who talks like that for a single dollar? Part of me wanted to chalk it up to mental illness, or maybe just plain street delusion. I've seen enough people down bad to know the mind cracks before the body does. But no, something in his voice had weight. Intent. And now that single sentence was dragging me back to the bus station like a hook in my spine. By 7:40 a.m., I was there again. Same vending machine. Same pigeons pecking at old fries. The chill in the morning air gnawed at my coat sleeves. I rubbed my hands together and sat on the cold bench across the street, facing the spot where he'd been. Nothing. I waited. Every car that passed, every footstep behind me, I turned, expecting it to be him. But the space stayed empty. Even the shadows looked less certain in the daylight. I checked the time. 7:59 a.m. Still nothing. Then I saw him. He didn't come from the direction I expected. He stepped out of a black SUV that pulled up across the road, sleek, spotless, with tinted windows. The kind of car that definitely didn't belong to a man with holes in his boots. I blinked twice, unsure I was seeing right. Same man. Same beard. Same eyes. But now he wore a clean hoodie, jeans that didn't sag with dirt, and shoes that didn't squish with water. He walked straight to me. I stood up, instinctively backing away. "What the?" "I told you I'd be here," he said, calm as a morning prayer. I stared at the SUV. "You wait. What's going on?" He reached into his back pocket and pulled out an envelope, thick, white, and sealed. "Take it," he said. "And don't open it until you get somewhere safe. Somewhere quiet. Not here." I didn't move. His face hardened just slightly. "This isn't a trick. It's a door. You opened it when you gave me your last dollar. Now it's your turn to walk through it." "Who are you?" Just someone who used to be invisible until one person stopped long enough to see me. Before I could ask another question, he turned again and climbed back into the SUV. The door shut with a gentle click. And just like last night, he vanished. But this time, he didn't disappear into shadows. This time, he disappeared into something I hadn't seen in years.
Possibility.
I held the envelope in my hands for at least 10 minutes before I could bring myself to open it. It felt heavier than it should have. Like the weight wasn't just in the paper, but in the choices that came with it. Back at the motel, I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at the seal. Then I broke it. Inside was cash. A lot of it. My heart slammed into my ribs. 50s.
Hundreds. Crisp.
Folded neatly.
Clean.
And a note. Handwritten. This is not charity. This is a reset. What you gave me was not money. It was belief. Now I give you the same. Go to the address below. Ask for Mira. Tell her Caleb sent you. You get one shot. Use it. I reread it twice, then flipped over the note. An address. A phone number. Nothing else. I didn't know what to think. Was this some elaborate scam? Some twisted social experiment? My mind whirled through every possible explanation that wasn't real. But I couldn't ignore the one thing that was. The cash. I counted it, nearly $4,000. For someone like me, that was everything.
Rent. Food. Hope.
But most of all, time. The man, Caleb, apparently, had taken my last dollar and somehow handed me a future. But what did he mean by one shot? Why Mira? And how did a guy who looked like he'd been sleeping under bridges end up climbing into a car that cost more than everything I owned? I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back to how things were. Not after this. So I packed my things, which wasn't much, just a half-empty duffel, a phone with a cracked screen, and a resume that hadn't seen a call back in months, and I took a bus to the address on the note. Because I needed to know what was waiting for me on the other side of this door. The address led me downtown, far from where I ever imagined I'd belong. It was a high-rise building made of shimmering glass and stone, the kind of place you'd expect investment bankers and tech CEOs to strut through like they owned gravity. I felt out of place just standing at the revolving doors. But I walked in. The security guard at the front desk raised an eyebrow, clearly noticing my thrift store jacket and worn-out boots. I cleared my throat and tried to sound like I belonged here. I'm here to see Mira. Caleb sent me. That changed everything. The guard's demeanor shifted instantly. One moment. He picked up the phone, murmured something I couldn't make out, then nodded. Take the elevator to the 24th floor. She's expecting you. I stepped into the elevator, the kind with mirrored walls that made you feel like your reflection was watching your every doubt. My stomach twisted. Excitement? Nerves? Maybe both. When the doors opened, I was met with an office space unlike anything I'd ever seen. Minimalist. Expensive. Quiet. Not dead, but intentional. Like every sound had been pre-approved. And at the end of the hallway, a woman stood in front of a glass wall overlooking the skyline. Sleek black suit. No-nonsense posture. She didn't look like someone who wasted time. You're the one Caleb sent? She asked without turning. I nodded. Yes. She turned slowly, eyes scanning me head to toe. Not judging. Calculating. Do you know who Caleb is? I hesitated. No, not really. I thought he was homeless when I met him. Her lips curled into a smile, sharp and unreadable. He used to be. 5 years ago, he was sleeping in the alley behind this building. Now he owns it. I blinked. What? She stepped closer. That dollar you gave him? He used to do that. Give his last dollar away to strangers. Until one of them offered him more than money, a job. A real shot. He spent the last 3 years looking for people who remind him of himself back then. And yesterday, he picked you. I swallowed hard. Mira nodded toward a leather chair. Sit. Let's talk about what you can do, and more importantly, who you want to become. She didn't ask for a resume. Instead, Mira pulled out a small notepad and scribbled a single question on it. What would you do if money was no object, and no one could stop you? She slid it across the table. I stared at the paper, heart racing. I thought about how I'd been surviving, clawing through weeks, patching holes in my dreams with duct tape and denial. But this question? It wasn't about survival. It was about becoming. I picked up the pen, and I wrote. I'd build a place where no one ends up invisible. A space for people like me. Like Caleb. A second chance sanctuary. Mira studied my answer. Her face remained unreadable. Then she stood, walked over to a locked drawer, and pulled out a folder. Caleb left this for you. Inside was a blueprint, a layout of a small, rundown community center, and a signed document.
A deed.
My breath caught in my chest. He bought the building last year. Said he'd find someone who needed it more than he ever did. And you? You just became that someone. I felt dizzy. He wants you to build it, she said. We'll cover the renovations, utilities, staffing. But the vision? The leadership? That's on you. You either step into this fully or walk away right now. It didn't feel real. But then again, nothing had since I gave away that $1. I'm in, I whispered. Mira smiled for the first time.
Good.
You start tomorrow. The community center looked like a place people forgot to believe in. Broken windows, peeling paint, a metal gate that whined in protest when I pushed it open. But the bones were strong. It had the kind of silence that wasn't empty, just waiting to be filled again. Inside, I found remnants of what it used to be. Scuffed basketballs, dusty bookshelves, rusted lockers. A ghost of warmth still lingered in the walls. This place had seen better days. But so had I. A note sat taped to the front counter. Don't fix the building first. Fix the people. They'll take care of the walls.
It was signed. C.
Word spread faster than I expected. By the end of the week, people started showing up. Some hungry, some scared. Most just tired of being ignored. A teen girl with bruises on her neck. A single father carrying a toddler with worn shoes. A war veteran who barely spoke, but always brought an extra sandwich to share. They didn't ask for much. Just to be seen. To be safe. And somehow, without training or money, or even a full night's sleep, I found myself becoming something I never thought I'd be. Useful. He showed up on a Thursday. Crisp suit. No expression. Carrying a briefcase like it held nuclear codes. You're the one Caleb picked, he asked. I nodded, uncertain. He set the briefcase on the desk and opened it. Inside was a stack of legal documents. Your name's been added to the board of his foundation. You'll have full discretion over this center. Funding. Staff. Direction. It's yours. I stared at the man, unsure if I should be thrilled or terrified. Why me? I asked. He closed the case and looked me dead in the eye. Because you were starving and still gave. The money came in waves, checks, donations, people volunteering, offering help. But with it, the pressure mounted. Every day felt like balancing on a tightrope. I'd never handled this much responsibility before. I found myself questioning every decision, wondering if I was worthy of the trust Caleb had placed in me. The community started to thrive, but the strain started showing. Sleepless nights, a growing list of things to fix, promises to keep. Some days, it felt like I was drowning. But then, in the middle of it all, a man walked in, the same homeless man from the street.
Caleb.
I froze. The moment he entered, the chaos in my head paused. You're doing well, he said, his voice softer now, the hard edge gone. But don't let the weight break you. I stared at him, emotions swirling like a storm. Why me? Why did you give me this chance? Caleb smiled, the same quiet, knowing smile. Because you reminded me of me. Someone who still had faith. Faith in others and in themselves. I had to know more. That night, I went to Caleb's old alley. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe a piece of the past. Maybe a clue that would explain why he'd turned his life around, and why he'd chosen me. The alley was quiet now, abandoned. No one else slept there. Just the echoes of time. I spotted something in the corner, an old, faded photograph. I picked it up. Caleb was in it, but he wasn't alone. A woman, younger, holding his hand. Her smile was as bright as his had been grim when we first met. I felt a lump form in my throat.
Who was she?
What had happened? Days turned into weeks, and the center was starting to flourish. People came for more than just food or shelter. They came for a chance. A second chance. They began to trust again. But then, just as things were settling down, something happened that shattered the peace. A young man, who'd been quiet since he'd arrived, snapped. He'd been talking to another guest in a heated argument when I heard the crash of a chair hitting the floor. By the time I reached the common area, he was backing into the corner, eyes wild, the anger bubbling out of him like a boiling pot. "Get him out of here," one of the staff shouted. I stepped forward, my heart pounding.
Hey.
"It's okay. Let's just talk." His eyes flickered between me and the door. He was dangerous, panicked. But I didn't back down. "You're not going to hurt anyone. Let's just talk." For a moment there was silence. Then, just as quickly as it had started, he broke down in tears, collapsing to his knees. The fight wasn't just against the world. It was against himself. I reached down, offering him a hand, helping him back to his feet. "You're safe here," I whispered. Things were changing at the center, but so were the stakes. More people were beginning to notice the success. And not all of them were happy about it. I received an anonymous letter a few days later, hand-delivered and sealed in an envelope with red wax. It read, "You're playing a dangerous game. Walk away before it's too late." I felt a chill creep up my spine. I looked at the address again. No name, no return. But the threat was clear. Someone didn't want the center to succeed. Someone was watching. The morning after the letter arrived, Caleb came back. His usual quiet, steady presence filled the room, and somehow, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. "Do you need help?" he asked. I didn't have to say anything. He knew. "I've been warned," I said, holding the letter up. Caleb didn't flinch. "It's to be expected. You're no longer invisible. And when people start noticing you, the first thing they want is to tear you down." His words hit hard. "I've got a plan," he continued, voice low and steady. "But it's going to take everything you have." As Caleb's words echoed in my head, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't back down now. The center had become too important. The people here weren't just numbers. They were my responsibility. But the letter was only the start. Rumors began to spread. People who were supposed to be on my side started questioning everything, questioning me. Who was Caleb really? Where did his money come from? Was he really just a kind soul or something darker? I didn't know who to trust anymore. But one thing was clear. The real battle had just begun. The pressure was building. Caleb had warned me, but nothing could have prepared me for the wave of chaos that was coming. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I felt eyes on me. And the threats weren't just coming in the form of letters anymore. Rumors started swirling around the center, about Caleb, about me. People who had been regulars were beginning to disappear, as if they were being picked off one by one. I needed answers.
Fast.
That's when I decided to dig deeper into Caleb's past. I went back to the building he'd bought, the one he'd turned into a safe haven for people like me. I'd never seen the deed before, never questioned how he could afford such a thing, but now, I had no choice. I found a file hidden behind a loose board in the wall. The documents were old, yellowed with age. And what I read made my stomach drop. Caleb hadn't just been homeless. He had been a criminal. A powerful one, involved in a network of illegal dealings. And the worst part? The woman in the photograph with him. She wasn't just his partner. She was his accomplice.
But she was dead now.
Killed, according to the file, under circumstances I couldn't quite piece together. When I found Caleb, he was sitting on the steps of the center, staring at the ground. His usual calm was replaced by something darker, something I couldn't quite place. "Caleb," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I need the truth." He didn't look up. "I've been digging," I continued. "I know who you were, what you did." He finally met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw the weight of his past. "You should have stayed out of it," he said softly. "I can't. I need to know why. Why me? Why this center?" Caleb stood, his eyes hardening. Because you were the one person who didn't ask questions. You saw something in me when no one else did. You believed in what was left of me. I was speechless for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. But I didn't want to drag you into this, he continued, his voice trembling. The truth? You're being watched, and not by anyone you can trust. Caleb's warning hit like a ton of bricks. Who was watching? And why now? I had built something here. The center was thriving. But now it felt fragile, like a house of cards waiting to collapse. I spent the next few days trying to piece everything together. But the more I dug, the more complicated things became. People who had once supported me were now pulling back, afraid of being associated with Caleb's past. I started to feel like I was sinking. Then, one evening, as I was closing up the center, I found an envelope, similar to the ones I'd received before. I tore it open, and the note inside made my heart stop. Walk away now, or everyone will pay the price. The next morning, the unthinkable happened. The center was broken into. Files were scattered. Computers smashed. All the progress we had made, gone in an instant. I stood in the wreckage, my heart pounding in my chest. Whoever was behind this was sending a message. I called Caleb immediately. No answer. The longer I stood there, the more I realized this wasn't just about the center anymore.
It was about me.
And whatever Caleb had left behind, whoever he had pissed off in the past, it was now coming for me. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. But when Caleb finally returned my call, his voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. You shouldn't have gotten involved, he said, his tone sharp. This was never supposed to be your fight. I didn't ask for any of this. I shot back, feeling the frustration boil over. I'm doing my best to make this work. But now, they're coming after me. They've destroyed everything I've worked for. There was silence on the other end of the line. They're coming after you because of me, Caleb finally said. And I can't protect you anymore. The pieces finally fell into place. Caleb wasn't just protecting me from his past. He was protecting me from the people he owed. I stood at the center, looking out over the place I had fought so hard to build. The people who relied on me. The ones who looked to me for hope. And I had to make a choice. It was never about the money or the status. It was about what I was willing to lose. I thought about walking away, disappearing, taking the easy route. But then I thought about everything I'd started. I couldn't run anymore. I turned and walked out of the building, determination flooding my veins. Caleb was right about one thing. I wasn't invisible anymore. And that was going to cost me everything. The confrontation happened faster than I expected. I received a call from Mira, her voice tight with urgency. Get out of the center.
Now.
They're here. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed what I could, ran to the front, and saw the men standing in the doorway. They weren't police or even anyone I recognized. But they didn't need to be. The leader of the group stepped forward, his gaze cold. You've got something that doesn't belong to you, he said, his words calm, but filled with threat. I refused to back down. What do you want? Caleb, you've been holding on to his legacy, but now it's time to give it back. The men didn't move, but their eyes were locked on me. I could feel the weight of their presence, the pressure building as if the air itself was thick with the promise of something bad. I stood my ground, heart racing in my chest. The people in the center had started to gather, drawn to the noise, the fear, but none of them dared to step forward. The leader's gaze never wavered. You're in over your head, kid, he said. You think you can just change the world with a few handouts and some hope? It doesn't work like that. I swallowed hard. What do you want from me? He stepped closer, his shadow swallowing mine. Caleb's money, his resources, his influence, they're ours. You've been using what isn't yours. And now it's time to pay. I felt my throat tighten. I'm not giving up what I've built here. He smirked. You don't have a choice. My mind raced. I could feel everything I'd worked for slipping away, like sand through my fingers. But then, something inside me snapped. I wasn't just fighting for the center anymore. I was fighting for myself. Get out, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos inside. You'll have to tear this place down to take it from me. His eyes darkened. We'll see about that. The threat was real. It wasn't empty words anymore. The center had become a battleground, and I was standing in the middle of it, unsure of how to fight back. That night, Caleb appeared again. This time, his face was shadowed with regret. They're closing in on you.
You need to leave now.
It's the only way you'll survive this. I looked at him, feeling the sting of betrayal in my chest. I've worked for this, Caleb. I'm not walking away. He sighed, his shoulders slumping. You're playing a dangerous game, and there's only one way to end it. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to walk away from the people who had found a home in the center, a place where they mattered. But then Caleb handed me a file. The contents shook me to my core. It was a letter, an official notice from a major investor, offering a deal, a life-altering deal. The price? The center. The people. Everything I had fought for. The offer was simple. Caleb's enemies would leave me and the center alone if I handed it over to them. The temptation to take it was strong. A guaranteed way out. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Tell them no, I said, pushing the letter away. Tell them I won't bow to fear. Caleb looked at me, disappointment flashing in his eyes. You're making a mistake. But I wasn't about to give up on the people who had believed in me. Not now, not ever. The next day, the attack came. It wasn't subtle. A group of masked men stormed the center, tearing through everything in their path. They destroyed everything they could, breaking windows, smashing furniture, ripping apart the walls we had worked so hard to rebuild. I watched from the shadows, my heart racing as I tried to formulate a plan. Then, Caleb stepped into the building, his expression grim. He'd come to help, but it was clear that his presence wasn't going to be enough. Get out, I shouted, grabbing a piece of debris and holding it up like a shield. Leave my people alone. The leader laughed. You still don't understand. You were never meant to win. This place was a mistake. I lunged forward, adrenaline surging through my veins. I wasn't going to let them destroy everything. Not after everything I had given. It was chaos. I felt the world spinning around me as I fought, not just for the center, but for my own redemption. Caleb tried to hold the men off, but the numbers were against us. It felt like we were losing ground with every minute that passed. The building was crumbling, both physically and emotionally. But I refused to give up. I gathered every ounce of strength I had left. I pushed forward, shouting for the others to run, to get to safety. But the leader blocked my path, a cruel smile on his face. You're still fighting for this? He taunted. You're nothing but a pawn. The words stung, but I didn't let them land. I pushed harder, my hands shaking with fury. No, I said, voice trembling but defiant. I'm not a pawn. I'm the one who's going to win. In that moment of desperation, something incredible happened. The people of the center, the ones I'd helped, the ones I'd believed in, came rushing in. They weren't afraid anymore. They weren't backing down. They fought with me, and together we pushed back. It was the most powerful thing I'd ever felt. The unity, the strength of those who had been ignored for so long. They were taking back what was theirs, too. We fought back the invaders, piece by piece, until they had no choice but to retreat. And just like that, it was over. The battle had been won. In the aftermath, the center was damaged, but it stood. Caleb disappeared again. His role in this had ended. He had given me the chance to rise. But the choice had always been mine to make. I looked around at the people who had fought with me. They were bruised, tired, but they were standing taller than they ever had. This place wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something bigger. Something we had all built together. I was no longer just the one who helped. I was the one who had fought. And in that, I found the kind of strength I'd never known I had. As the days passed, we began rebuilding. It wasn't easy, but nothing worth having ever is. The center slowly regained its footing, and the community grew stronger. I realized something profound in the process. My journey wasn't just about giving. It was about proving that people like me, people with nothing, could create something meaningful. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that away. The center became a symbol of what could happen when you believed in others, when you gave them a chance. It was more than just a building. It was a place where people had learned to hope again. And it was mine. And maybe, just maybe, the world would start to see that it was enough. I never saw Caleb again. But the impact he left on me, on the center, would never fade. He had given me a chance. He had shown me a path to redemption. I was no longer invisible. And in that, I had become the person I was always meant to be.